The anime begins in the magical world named Alneath. There is an ongoing war between the mortals with limited lifespans and the immortals with respawn hacks. The outcome of the war depended on the battle between the two strongest men on both sides, Graham the human hero and Veltol the demon lord ruling over the immortals. A battle like this would normally be a lost cause since Veltol is immortal, but with the holy sword Graham possessed, he was able to deal a blow strong enough that it somehow overcame Veltol's regeneration and led to his demise. Veltol couldn't help but praise the hero for managing to defeat him, but he was still salty about losing to a mortal, so in his final moments, he swore that he would return to get his revenge, and with that, he vanished from the world. Years later, Veltol awakens once more and he is greeted by one of his loyal servants, Machina. She kneels before him and says she has patiently waited 500 years for the day that he would return, and she apologizes for having to attend to him in such informal attire, but Veltol says he doesn't mind. He's just glad she managed to perform his reincarnation ritual and bring him back to life, but with that said, he has no clue where they are and wants to begin his conquest of Alneath once more. However, about that Machina tells him a lot of stuff happened in the 500 years since his death and Alneath it's gone. Around 80 years ago, Alneath and Earth were caught in major catastrophe, which caused the two worlds to fuse with one another. As a result, 90% of the population was wiped out and national governments ceased to function, so cities began to operate as independent states and a few wars have broken out since then, but things are relatively peaceful now. That's the present state of the world, and given that Earth possessed incredibly advanced technology and Alneath possessed magitech, the fusion of the two worlds led to a lot of rapid advancement. Machina leads him to the surface to show him what the new world looks like, and Veltol is astounded by how far the world has come. But in his astonishment, he forgets to pay attention to his surroundings, so he nearly bumps into a random guy in the street and Machina has to push him out of the way. He apologizes to her for letting himself get distracted, but he can't believe that man so carelessly bumped into her, one of the 6 dark peers. It's almost as if they don't know or care who she is, so Veltol is prepared to instill a new sense of fear into these foolish mortals. He raises his hand to the sky and Machina already knows what he's about to do, so she tries to tell him it's not a good idea, but it's already too late, as he has already fired his spell into the sky and created a massive hole in the cloud cover. In an anticlimactic turn of events that people seem more annoyed than scared by the fact that someone was dumb enough to use magic in the city, and an alarm goes off soon after, so Machina explains that it is forbidden to use grand magic within the city, so they have to get out of here before they get in trouble. Veltol doesn't understand why he has to do something as cowardly as running away, but since Machina insists, he goes along with her. However, as they are leaving, Veltol notices someone who looks a lot like the hero Graham. He has no time to confront the man as Machina continues to drag him away. Once they are out of danger, Machina sits down with Veltol and informs him that after he died, the immortals had to sign a ceasefire with mortals and the war between them ended, but when the worlds fused 80 years ago, the citizens of the immortal kingdom were forced to scatter all across the world, and not long after the major industries began a crusade against them. Veltol asks what she means, so Machina tells him that the people of the world collectively decided that immortals didn't deserve human rights, so they began relentlessly hunting them. At first it wasn't that bad, but then people developed anti-immortal weaponry, and from that point on immortals were killed on sight to the point of near extinction. It takes a few moments for Veltol to process that his people have been wiped out, but once he comes to terms with it, he asks Machina that she knows what happened to the other 5 dark peers. The whereabouts of May, Silwald and Rasheen are all unknown, but sadly, Xenol was confirmed to be dead. He sacrificed himself and acted as a decoy so Machina can escape from the hunters, and he said he was doing it for the sake of Veltol because aside from Rasheen, Machina was the only other person capable of performing Veltol's reincarnation ritual. Xenol always been a loyal follower of Veltol, so he is grateful to have had such a good subordinate. But there's still one more person Machina hasn't mentioned, so Veltol asks her about Marcus. Machina doesn't really want to talk about Marcus, so tries to change the subject and ask Veltol if he's thirsty. Veltol says he isn't, so Machina has to make up an excuse as to why he needs to drink something and tells him to wait there while she goes to buy one. While she's gone, a VTuber starts streaming on some billboards, and he's wondering what the hell it's supposed to be, but then he notices several lights flowing around the area, and it seems to be caused by this one girl on a roof near the billboards. It's not clear what she's doing at first, but then she flicks her wrist and in an instant all the billboards start playing hub videos. The girl seems pretty pleased with herself, and no one knows she's the one who did it, so she starts walking away, but as she is leaving, Veltol calls out to her and she panics a little because she just got caught. She tries pretending that she's not involved in any way, but Veltol clearly saw her do something with the surrounding ether, and then all of a sudden the screens changed. She can't believe someone was perceptive enough to figure out what she did based on the surrounding ether alone, so she asked Veltol who he is, although she doesn't take him seriously when he says he's the Demon Lord. Veltol explains that he knows she did something to the giant picture screens, but he doesn't understand the principle behind it, so he would love to learn about it from an expert like her. The girl was flattered that he thinks she's an expert on the subject, so she starts talking about how this was just some basic hacking, and by comparison, leaking the Pokemon files was way harder. All she did just now was take advantage of a fatal flaw in the billboard's logic barrier, and then she just slipped in some spicy videos for fun. Veltol interrupts her speech and tells her she's looking for one of his subordinates named Marcus, and he's wondering if she has any idea where he can find him. The girl points to the massive tower in the middle of the city and says the CEO of that company is named Marcus, so he might be able to find him if he goes there. Veltol follows her advice and heads up to the heavy magic industries in search of Marcus. As he enters, he spots this weird-looking thing waving at him, but he ignores it and heads to the front desk and tells the receptionist that he is here looking for Marcus, but before he's even done speaking, Marcus's private secretary comes down and says she is here to bring Veltol to Marcus. They both get on elevator headed to the top of the tower, and while they go up, Veltol notices that the secretary has a pin of that thing he saw when he came in, so he asks what that is about. She proudly exclaims that this is the mascot of the company, and they plan to create a brand around it in the near future. Eventually, Veltol arrives at the top of the tower where he finds Marcus sitting atop his throne. Marcus says it has been a long time since he last saw Veltol, but Veltol finds it disrespectful that Marcus is remaining sit while in the presence of his king. Marcus ignores him and asks what business he has here, so Veltol says he wants Marcus to help him rebuild the Immortal Kingdom. Marcus laughs in his face for a solid minute before telling him that he won't be doing that in a mocking tone. Veltol feels insulted, so he prepares to teach Marcus a painful lesson and respect. However, before he can cast his spell, Marcus's assistant strikes at him with a blade, so he is forced to dodge out of the way. He is shocked that she is capable of using armament forging magic, but before she attacks again, Marcus tells her to stand down. He then turns to Veltol and tells him he has become weak because in his prime he would never have felt threatened by magic of that scale. How exactly doesn't he intend to take over the world if a single human is able to give him so much trouble? Marcus refuses to serve a king who is so pitiful, so he tells Veltol to get out of his sight before he forces him. Veltol is enraged and begins casting his spell to take Marcus down, but before he can finish, Marcus has already cast a spell breaker and Veltol is left in shock because Marcus was never gifted enough to outclass him in spell casting. Marcus has been waiting for this moment for years, so he takes great pleasure in telling Veltol that his strength is a relative of the past. He reveals the implant in the back of his neck, but Veltol doesn't know what that thing is, so Marcus pulls up an instructional video explaining everything about it. The device is called a familia, and while using magic normally requires a 5-step process: initialization, construction, expansion, incantation, and proclamation. This device allows people to skip 3 steps, so now anyone, and I mean anyone, can use magic at high levels, and in case Veltol is getting any ideas about implanting a familia of his own, Marcus specifically designed it to be incompatible with higher beings like Veltol. That means he can never use a familia, and while his natural spellcasting speed is superhuman compared to AI spellcasting, he might as well be sending his spells by mail. Veltol asks why Marcus is doing all of this, so Marcus reveals that he had never liked Veltol from the very day they met. He was tyrannical, arrogant, and worst of all, he had the skills to warn his arrogance, so Marcus could never oppose him back then, but that all changes now. He tells Veltol that it's about time for him to leave, so he begins launching several blood swords at him, and Veltol isn't able to dodge all of them, so he ends up getting stabbed several times and launched out of the window. Marcus has always wanted to do that, and now that he has finally triumphed over Veltol, he declares that he is the new Demon Lord. But all that aside, his secretary really wants to discuss the promotional ideas she has for the company mascot, so Marcus tells her to submit her ideas at the next planning meeting. Meanwhile, Veltol has crash-landed back into the city and his regeneration is far slower than it used to be, so he is having a hard time recovering from his injury. He tries to walk out into the street, but he accidentally bumps into someone, and as a result he gets into a fight that he immediately loses. Now look at him, laid out in a pile of trash and wondering why he keeps losing to mortals that he lost to the herogram until Machina eventually finds him. Machina gets him onto a train and begins apologizing for hesitating to inform him of Marcus's betrayal, and because of her hesitation he ended up being disgraced so badly. He tells her there's no need to apologize because even if she had told him, he would have still wanted to confirm it for himself. Once the train comes to a stop, Machina leaves Veltol to the apartment building she lives in and tells him this is her home. Veltol thinks she means the entire building belongs to her, but Machina leads him into her small room and explains that this is where she really lives. Veltol thinks she's joking at first, but Machina is dead serious because this is all she can afford with her salary. Veltol realizes she has been living like this all this time while waiting for his return, so he pulls her close and thanks her because he will never forget the loyalty she has shown him. The story continues. We see centuries ago Machina was being persecuted by the people of her time because after they found out that she was immortal, they naturally blamed her for all their problems and decided that the best course of action would be to throw her into a volcano. However, before Machina could hit the lava, Veltol appeared out of nowhere to save her. This was their first time meeting, and the only reason Veltol came was because he heard there was another immortal like him in the area, and after seeing Machina for the first time he was not disappointed. He extended an offer to her to devote her body and soul to him, and from that day forward, Machina has remained loyal to Veltol. She soon wakes up to her alarm, and before Veltol wakes up, she heads to the kitchen to make breakfast. While waiting for the soup to boil, she calls on her virtual assistant, Eliclate, and a miniature version of herself appears in her field of view. It gives her a breakdown of the date, time, and current weather conditions. Machina asks Select how she's doing, so Elec runs a full diagnostic check on her systems and reports that everything is in perfect working order, which is good, but that's now exactly what Machina was asking. Machina finishes up with breakfast, and once she's done, she goes to wake Veltol up and serves him the food. He's never seen food like this before, but just by its smell, he can tell that it is going to taste great. He picks up the chopsticks to try it, and sure enough he loves the food Machina made for him, and hearing that makes her extremely happy. Once he has done eating, Veltol asks if Machina knows of the location of any other immortals, and she does know the few other immortals who managed to escape the immortal hunts. But recently, immortals have been going missing, and Machina has even lost contact with two of her close aides, Ornard and Pomlock. She hopes they just went into hiding, but with no way of contacting them she can't be sure. Veltol asks if immortal hunts still happen, but she answers that the hunts actually ended decades ago. The hunts were started by Marcus to secure his position at the top, and now that he has all the power, he has no reason to continue. The resentment people head towards immortals has also dwindled over the years, so it's not particularly dangerous to be seen outside. After Machina's aides went missing, she went to their apartment to check up on them, and the place was a mess, so she assumes the fight happened, but the only clues she could find was this note with the words Immortal Furnace written on it. As Veltol reads the message, he reaches for his cup of tea, but sudden sharp pain causes him to flinch, so he spills it everywhere. It seems that he still hasn't fully healed from the injuries he sustained yesterday, and it's not just his regeneration that got weaker. Everything about him is weaker than it used to be. Even that spellcaster when he first arrived would have had a much greater effect if Veltol were at full power, and Machina attributes this to the fact that the faith Veltol used as power during his prime no longer exists. As of now, he's only spoken of in history books. Without recognition, Veltol's powers will never truly return to him, but he thinks that should be easy enough to solve. He just has to make himself known once more. With that said, he tells Machina that he wants to head out and explore the surrounding area since sitting around all day would be bad for him, so Machina suggests that the two of them should go shopping. Out in the city, the first thing they should do is get Veltol a set of good street clothes, so they walk into a store and Machina asks him to step on the platform so the machine can take a 3D scan of his body. She apologizes for being limited to cheap store clothes due to her budget, but Veltol tells her he doesn't mind since his natural beauty would look good in any attire. After taking his measurements, she asks if Veltol has any preferences, but he doesn't know much about the style of the current era, so he leaves the choice up to Machina. Machina decides to ask Elec to make the most optimal choice for Veltol, taking into account budget and practicality, so after a bit of processing Elec settles on a tracksuit. Machina doesn't think a tracksuit would be a good idea, but once Veltol sees it, he absolutely loves the way it looks, and he is even more intrigued by the design on the back. So, Machina explains it's an old language used by the people who used to live on this land, and the symbols on the jacket spell out Demon Lord. Since Veltol seems to like it, she takes the tracksuit for him and walks out of the store, but before she leaves he gets her attention because they haven't paid for it yet. However, Machina explains that all transactions are performed automatically. After that they have some food in fast food joint, and while they are sitting together, Veltol asks Machina what it's like to have a familia installed. Marcus's betrayal aside, the familia is without a doubt a revolutionary device, so he is curious about it. Machina explains that it is really convenient since it not only allows for easier use of magic, but it can also be used to gather information, go shopping, or even communicates. Before familias were mainstream, people had smartphones to do these things, but it was really inconvenient to have to hold it. Veltol asked her to let him see it, so he turns her around and begins touching it. Machina is a little startled at first, but she's actually really enjoying this so much so that her familia has to warn her that her heart rate just spiked. Once he is done inspecting it, Veltol asks her if it isn't uncomfortable having the familia installed in the nape of her neck, and while it felt strange at first, she got used to it once it became illegal for companies to stream ads straight into people's heads. It's difficult to live daily life without one of these, but at the same time, having a familia doesn't necessarily make your life better, as shown by her current living situation. As they walk home, Veltol makes a declaration that he will get a job. Machina has taken aback and tells Veltol that he doesn't need to do something as lowly as working. Her living conditions may be suboptimal right now, but she assures him that she will provide a better lifestyle for him. She says she will just pick up more shifts or maybe even get 2 or 3 more jobs, but Veltol interrupts her and says that times have changed. He is no longer the omnipotent god he once was, so he needs to adapt to the current circumstances. And most importantly, he wouldn't feel right if he just sat back and did nothing while Machina worked to provide him with food, clothing, and shelter. Without his duties as king to occupy him, he only needs to take up labor, but that does not mean he has given up on conquering the world. So he asks Machina if she's willing to continue to serve him, and Machina swears to be by his side for the rest of her life. Later that day, Veltol is about to head out to look for a job, but Machina refuses to let him go without her because she's worried about him. Veltol tells her she can't come since she has her own job to worry about, but Machina says she can just call off for the day so she can go with him. Veltol refuses to let her do that, so he reminds her that in the unlikely event that he fails to find a job, he would have to rely on her income, so she can't just skip out on her job. Machina agrees to let him go on his own, but for safety, she hands Veltol a device that comes with a little money in case of emergencies. It also has a tracker, so if there's any trouble, Veltol can use this to contact her and she will race over as soon as possible. He realizes that she is worried about him, but the extent she is going to just makes him feel like a child. Still, even though he said he wanted to go by himself, he doesn't have a clue what kinds of jobs are available or how to get one. He's also starting to get hungry, so he can't afford to be picky about it, unless he wants to end up begging on the street. He gets up and yells out that he has no money and is looking for a job, but as he is yelling, one guy comes up to him and tells him to stop. He says if Veltol wants work, he should go to the commercial guild with his citizen ID, but Veltol has never heard of a citizen ID, so the guy assumes he must be an immigrant. Since it's clear that Veltol doesn't know anything about the city, the man informs him that this is his turf, so Veltol can't be doing stuff like this out here. Veltol hadn't realized he was encroaching on someone else's territory, so he apologizes and turns to leave, but before he does, the man hands him an application form and tells him to take it to the commercial guild so he can apply for a job there. They won't guarantee that he gets anything, but it's better than having nothing. Also, he warns Veltol not to get involved with any companies under the IHI company, especially construction-related, because they are incredibly exploitative and laugh in the face of safety regulations. Veltol takes the man's advice and thanks him for the help, so he heads to the commercial guild in search of employment. However, once he gets there, the interviewer isn't too enthusiastic about employing him. On his application, Veltol wrote down wide-scale annihilation magic as one of his special skills, and he also wrote down dungeon creation and experience leading a nation 500 years ago, so the interviewer calmly puts down his application and tells Veltol that there are no positions available for him. Besides, since Veltol doesn't have a familia, he isn't eligible for hire anyway. After Veltol returns home, he's feeling really depressed about not getting a job, so he lays on Machina's lap and asks her if he is really incapable of doing anything in this world, but she assures him that he is still superior to everyone else. So she tells him he should just let her do the work and from now on. However, Veltol refuses to sit idle, so he asks Machina if there's anyone she can contact for assistance, and now that she thinks about it, there is someone she can call. Veltol is surprised that Machina actually has a friend in this era, but Machina wouldn't exactly call the person a friend. They do go shopping together, eat, play and sleep over sometimes, but that's about it. Veltol is confused because they sound exactly like a friend to him, but Machina still refuses to acknowledge it. A little while later, they meet Machina's friend in a nearby cafe, and it turns out to be a hacker girl Veltol had met yesterday. She introduces herself properly to Veltol and says her name is Takahashi, but even though Machina had mentioned how the great demon lord would one day be revived, she never actually thought she would be able to meet him in the flesh. She starts poking Veltol to make sure he is real, and Machina yells at her not to be disrespectful, but Veltol says it's fine since he is the one asking her for assistance here. Veltol asks how Takahashi and Machina met, so Takahashi starts explaining that she met Machina on a doujin site. But after seeing the look on Machina's face, she realizes that she probably shouldn't tell Veltol about Machina's search history, so she tells him to forget about it. Just then, Veltol notices the familia on Takahashi's neck, so if he reaches over to inspect it, which freaks Takahashi out, but she lets him finish what he's doing. Veltol apologizes for startling her, but he noticed that Takahashi's familia was different from Machina's, so he was looking into how it is built and how it functions. Takahashi's surprised that Veltol can do all that just by touching it, so Machina explains that Veltol has a sage eye ability that allows him to use the flow of mana to understand the composition of any object he touches. He has a general idea of how a familia works, but there are still a lot of components he can't fully analyze yet. However, that's a problem for another day because the reason they are here right now is to ask if Takahashi can introduce Veltol to some kind of work. She asks why Veltol doesn't just go to the commercial guild, but he already tried that and they rejected him for not having a familia, and drew a certain CDO's vendetta against him. Veltol can't have a familia installed, so they were hoping Takahashi would have some ideas. Takahashi thinks about it for a second, and Veltol is a young-looking 500-year-old demon lord with a great voice, handsome face, and no familia. Yeah, there's only one clear option available, so it has been decided that Veltol will become a streamer. The story continues. We see Takahashi explain that streamers post videos of themselves doing stuff online, for which they receive money from ad revenue or donations. She even has some leftover equipment from when she used to stream, although it will be a little outdated, but if he becomes popular, he can just buy new equipment for himself. Machina says she's firmly against the idea of Veltol becoming a streamer, because the job is extremely unstable and risky. She thinks it would be much better if he got a reliable job like flipping burgers, but Takahashi thinks this could be a great opportunity for him. Veltol has a great voice, great looks, and incredible aura, so he fits all the markers for becoming a star, and when she puts it like that, Machina can't deny that Veltol is charming, but she still isn't sure this is a good idea. There are some games he wouldn't be able to play without a familia, but he could always just stick to the games that still use physical controls, and most people don't even watch because of the game anymore, they just be watching to see Veltol do stuff. Machina asks him what he thinks about all this, and given the fact that he doesn't have many options available to him, he agrees to go along with Takahashi's idea. Later that day, Machina was taking a bath while Veltol did some research about this world's internet, and it doesn't take him long to figure out how it works. It allows people to spread information faster than anything he has ever seen, but as a result of all this access, people either resort to watching cat videos or doing degenerate shit online. He believes it should be easy enough for him to sway public opinion in his favor with this, but all of a sudden Machina finishes her bath and walks out completely naked. Once she realizes what just happened, she gets dressed and apologizes to Veltol for being so inconsiderate. She has lived alone for so long that it became a habit, but Veltol tells her that there's nothing to be sorry about because he actually thought her body was quite beautiful, although he still thinks his own body is better. A couple hours later, Takahashi arrived at Machina's house with all her old equipment so she can help Veltol set it up. And once it's done, she hands him the controller so he can try out some games. She tries explaining the controls to him, but Veltol tells her there's no need since he already knows exactly how it works. Something like this is much easier to analyze than a familia, so he starts scrolling through the game library and settles on Bloodborne. Takahashi remembers how so many people rage quit because the game was too difficult, but she's sure Veltol's analysis skills will make this easy for him. However, as Veltol starts up the game, he couldn't even make it past the intro. It's a lot harder than he thought it would be, and even after a few hours of gameplay, he still hasn't made much progress, so Takahashi tells him straight up that he sucks at it. Machina thinks Takahashi is being rude, but Veltol is well aware that he sucks at this. He understands the mechanics, but he just can't seem to master it, so Machina is a little worried that he won't be able to stream after all. On the contrary, Takahashi thinks this will actually work out great for Veltol's online image. Is the only thing the internet loves more than a hot guy is a hot guy who fails confidently. But before that, Takahashi says they need to work on Veltol's introductory greeting. Veltol asks if he can just introduce himself normally, but Takahashi tells him that that's not an option. There are already over 5 million streamers in the world, and barely 1% of those streamers actually make enough money to survive, so if Veltol wants to get into the business, he has to think of a way to leave an impression on as many people as possible with his greeting. Takahashi seems to think that greeting is a really big deal, so Veltol asks Machina if she has any ideas on what he could use as a greeting. Machina thinks about it for a second and she thinks it would be best if he just adapted one of his word and declarations and used that. It also gives it a try, and the declaration is basically him telling the foolish mortals that they should be honored to be in his presence, and it's dramatic, so Takahashi thinks it's a good start, but it still isn't very attention-grabbing, so they will have to think of something to add to it. In the meantime, Takahashi says she will give Veltol a crash course on everything he needs to know about streaming. Basically, he's going to need to stream every day, even if no one is watching, and no matter what he does, he has to avoid talking about any erotic or racist stuff, because that would get him banned quicker than as mingled. Most important of all, while Veltol is streaming, Machina has to make sure she never gets caught on camera, because they can't have people thinking she's his girlfriend. As a friend gesture, Takahashi asked one of her friends to help promote his stream, but he owes her a favor after this. Time goes on and Veltol starts becoming more and more popular, but when the trolls inevitably invade his stream, he is absolutely unfazed and even encourages them to keep roasting him. It doesn't matter to him, since he gains power for having others think about him, so even negative publicity works out in his favor. Before long, through hard work and determination, Veltol reaches 1 million views, and for his latest stream he will be playing Bloodborne 3 non-stop until he clears it. However, while he does this, there's a camera being pointed at Machina's house, and it captures the moment Machina gets home from work. As Machina enters, Veltol has just successfully cleared the game, so he is celebrating his victory and many of his fans congratulate him on it. He'd improved a lot after finishing the first and second Bloodborne games, but this was still insanely difficult to beat, and he's glad he got through it. He thanks all his fans and haters for sticking with him until he was done. But with that said, he has to end the stream for today. Once he is done, Veltol breathes a sigh of relief and Machina opens the door to check if he needs anything. Veltol says he's fine and he's going to head out because he has a package he wants to pick up. Machina offers to go pick up his package for him instead, but Veltol has been looking for an excuse to move around for a while, so Machina says she will have dinner ready for him by the time he gets back. He heads out into the city, and as he walks through the slums, he talks about how distorted and trained the social structures are in this city. However, as he continues to walk, he is shocked to come across a familiar face, sitting on the side of the road, Hero Graham. Back in the day, Graham was a kind brother and was taking care of his little sister Melina, who's fallen ill. He comforted her and said he would head out to gather some medicinal herbs to help her recover, but as he was about to leave, his father called out to him and handed him a sword. He had heard that there were monsters active in the forest, so he wants Graham to take the sword so he can protect himself. He runs into anything dangerous. His mother is also worried about his safety, so she says a small prayer for him before he leaves, and Graham thanks both of them for their consideration. He went out into the forest that day and the herb gathering went smoothly, and as he was returning home, he ran into an army of lizard men under the leadership of Xenol, one of Veltol's generals. Since he was hidden, he didn't have to fight them, but he wondered what they could possibly be doing in such a remote location. To his horror, when he returned home, he discovered that his home along with his entire family had been burnt to the ground, and from that day forward, he swore that he would get his revenge on Veltol. But right now he has a dazed look in his eyes, and he is seated next to his sworn enemy. Veltol begins talking about this udon shop and assures Graham that this is one of the best feelings around, but Graham doesn't have much to say about that. Veltol tries to keep the conversation going and says that the food of this world is far better than it was back in his day, and Graham agrees, but he still doesn't have much to say. The food finally arrives and they are both about to eat, but Graham finally says something and talks about how strange it feels to be slurping noodles while seated next to the enemy who killed his family and friends. Veltol also feels the same way since Graham single-handedly killed several of Veltol's vassals, but right now he bears no hatred towards Graham at all. He's just curious to know how Graham managed to survive this long when he's mortal. The only explanation would be if Graham somehow became immortal, but that would go against his entire ideology of making the most out of the limited lifespan. Graham explains that he didn't give up his mortality, rather as a reward for defeating Veltol, the goddess Meldia gifted him with the blessing of eternal youth, and while that blessing has allowed him to live this long, it doesn't make him immortal. Veltol comments that goddess Meldia must have been quite fond of him, so he can imagine her granting him such a blessing. After Graham ended the war with the immortals began starting wars among themselves again, so he was ordered to go out to the battlefield and slay the same mortals he had once fought to save. And even after the civil war had ended, the people turned their hatred towards Graham for some reason. Veltol believes an outcome like that was inevitable, since people naturally fear individuals with great power. Graham was exiled from the kingdom, so he was forced to wander for centuries until Fantasion happened and the world became fused. Since then, he has killed so many mortals and immortals that he believes there is no place for him left in this world as a hero. He asks to Veltol why he sought to rule the world in the first place, so Veltol answers that he was trying to achieve world peace. There are several ways one can become an immortal, like phoenixes, curses, or blessings, so aside from a few rare exceptions, all immortals used to be mortal at some point. Still, mortals constantly ostracized and persecuted immortals because they were different, and the immortals were no better because they did the exact same thing to the mortals. The lesson Veltol took from this was that no matter what you are, people will always hate and fear that which is different, so he believed that the only way to bring about world peace was to stand at the top of the world and rule it to make sure no one had to suffer such persecution. Graham doesn't believe peace through world domination would work, but he also can't deny that people left on their own will never achieve peace because he has experienced this senseless persecution and wars firsthand. Even so, he still refuses to admit that Veltol is right, so Veltol accepts that Graham will never agree with him. Graham gets up to leave and thanks Veltol for the noodles, but before he goes he tells Veltol that he's glad he got the chance to speak with him. Veltol gets up to leave as well, and while walking down the street, he notices Takahashi down in an alley and she seems to be in some kind of trouble. She apparently hired this ogre for a job, but now he is trying to extort twice the pay from her. Takahashi tells him he's stupid if he thinks she's going to give him that much money, but the ogre is totally prepared to beat her up if he doesn't get what he wants, so he raises his hand is about to punch her. However, Veltol grabs his arm and tells him to leave Takahashi alone. He's feeling generous today, so he is willing to overlook the ogre's disrespect, but the ogre recognizes Veltol as the guy he beat up a while ago, so he isn't scared of him. He says he's going to kill Veltol this time, so Takahashi tries telling Veltol to run before he gets hurt, but Veltol says it's fine since he's been meaning to test out how much power he has regained from his 1 million subscribers. As the ogre tries to punch him, Veltol stretches out his hand and catches the punch, but then the ogre activates wind magic and completely shatters Veltol's arm. However, with his powers partially restored, Veltol is able to regenerate his arm instantly and flicks the ogre into a pile of trash. The guy's out cold and Veltol is honestly disappointed since he was expecting more of a fight. Takahashi comes up to him and asks if he is alright and Veltol says he's perfectly fine, but he wants to know who that guy was and why he was attacking her. Takahashi explains that he was supposed to be her bodyguard for a big job today, but all of a sudden, he started making ridiculous demands. He didn't know the guy was supposed to her bodyguards, so he apologized for knocking him out, but Takahashi says it's alright since she just found someone even better. She asked Veltol to become her bodyguard for the day, and she even offers to pay him for it too, so since he owes her a favor, Veltol agrees. Takahashi leads him to the location and tells him that she's trying to steal something from this warehouse, so she needs him to create a distraction while she gets it. Veltol says he understands the objective, but before Takahashi can give him any more instructions, he gets up and despite Takahashi trying to stop him, he has already kicked down the door to a major Yakuza operation. The story continues. We see Veltol doesn't really know where he's supposed to be doing here, so he asks Takahashi over the comms if the cube in the table is the target. Takahashi tells him it is, but she's also confused as to how he's communicating with her since he doesn't have a familia. Veltol proudly states that he just copied the communication ether at the familia producers, so can reproduce the feature of magic. Anyway, since there aren't that many enemies here, Veltol says he will subdue them and claim the cube for Takahashi, but before he does anything she asks him to make sure he doesn't kill anyone. Veltol agrees to hold back, so before the fight begins, he announces himself using his stream greeting. However, none of the Yakuza members has seen his stream, so it just makes things really awkward. If there are still people who don't recognize him, Veltol is going to have to work a lot harder to make his name known, but for now his 1 million subscribers worth of power should be more than enough to take these guys down. The Yakuza are still confused about what's going on, but they assume Veltol must just be some crazy guy, so one of them pulls out a magic gun and fires in the end. However, Veltol isn't fazed by this and uses strengthening magic on himself so he can deflect the bullets. Once the Yakuza member runs out of ammo, Veltol goes on the offensive and begins knocking the Yakuza members out one after the other with minimal effort. The Yakuza member with a magic gun switches to a regular gun since it's faster than reloading, but just before he shoots, Takahashi takes control of his vision and displays an illusion that tricks the Yakuza member into shooting his partner. Veltol then knocks the last guy out, and with all of them unconscious, the mission is practically over. Veltol goes over to one of the Yakuza members and begins inspecting their guns, which uses some kind of card as ammunition. Takahashi is impressed with how easily Veltol took out those Yakuza, but they should really grab the box and get out of here before they get themselves into more trouble than they accounted for. She says she's on her way to meet up with Veltol, but he tells her to stay where she is because it looks like trouble just arrived. Whatever it is, it begins attacking Veltol. All it's covered with some sort of invisibility cloak, so it even the playing field. Veltol uses the magic gun to blast the cloak off, revealing a giant mecha suit. Takahashi recognizes this as 4th generation Magino gear, and it couldn't possibly belong to the Yakuza, because these things are far too expensive for them to own. This is the first time Veltol has ever seen something like this before, and he's eager to test his strength against it, so he begins by firing the magic gun at it. Predictably, the magic gun does absolutely nothing against the giant mech, but the assailant decides to follow Veltol's lead and pulls out a magic gun of his own, but his is a lot more powerful. He tries to shoot Veltol, but Veltol is too quick for him and manages to sneak into a blind spot above the mech. By the time the assailant finally locates and locks onto him, Veltol is already in position and fires a powerful blast of straight at the mech. At full power, he could have easily one-shot the mech, but while Veltol's blast was certainly strong and his current power level, he knows there was nowhere near strong enough to defeat a foe like the mech. Although that doesn't mean he can't win this fight, because if blasts don't work, he will just have to go for close combat, so he summoned the sword. The mech matches Veltol and converts its gun into a sword, so the two charge at each other and clash in a magnificent display of strength and animation budget. Veltol is having a lot of fun with this fight, as things drive on. The mech gets serious, and before Veltol even realizes what's going on, his arm gets chopped off and gets beheaded. With Veltol seemingly dead, the guy in the mech begins to report that his target has been eliminated, but then the guy freaks out because Veltol's decapitated head starts talking to him. Veltol praises him for being skilled enough to behead the Demon Lord, but he still lacks the combat experience to know that you always double tap your enemy to make sure they are dead. In any case, Veltol believes the guy deserves a reward for fighting so well, so Veltol says he will allow the mech pilot the honor of witnessing the strongest weapon within his arsenal. Its terrifying aura is emanated as Veltol summons the great sword Vernal, and the mech pilot is so stunned that he can barely move. He's never fought anyone who possessed such strength, and he is completely defenseless as Veltol cuts his limbs off one by one until he falls to the ground with only one leg left. Veltol makes sure to avoid hitting any vital organs, so the guy inside there should still be alive, and he plans to interrogate him. But before he does, the guy in the mech sends one final report back to HQ, saying he failed to eliminate the target and failed to retrieve the objective, so he will now be executing Code 8090, and if you're wondering what 8090 means, let's just say there was a gun installed in the helmet of the suit to make sure the pilot can't be interrogated. Half of that's over. Takahashi comes out of her hiding spot and she's glad Veltol is alright, but it was really freaky to see him get his head chopped off. Although Veltol doesn't seem to think it was a big deal, he is more surprised that weaponry exists that could enhance the individual's power to such an extent, so he says this time period is truly terrifying. However, Takahashi thinks Veltol is the terrifying one because he just single-handedly destroyed Magino gear, and these things are strong enough to wipe out entire countries if needed. This also happens to be one made by Marcus's company, and Takahashi knows the Yakuza would never be able to get their hands on one of the suits, so she's starting to worry that this mission might be more trouble than she bargained for. That aside, Veltol is still curious why they went through so much effort just to acquire Cube, so Takahashi explains to him that the Cube is actually a storage device and what her client is after is the information inside the Cube. Takahashi says they can take a look at data if Veltol wants, so she pulls out a cube reader and places the cube on it. At first, the only thing that appears is a blank page, but after a little tweaking from Takahashi, the cube opens up and a list of names appears on the list. Takahashi has no idea what to make of this list of names, but Veltol recognizes the people on this list to be his immortal subjects. This is concerning, so Takahashi says she will contact her client so she can find out what the list is about, but unfortunately her client isn't answering his phone, so they're going to have to go meet him in person if they want to discuss this. Takahashi leaves Veltol's in the massive apartment building where her client is and says the guy they're looking for is up on the 13th floor. As they walk up to the front door, Takahashi uses her hacking skills to bypass the security system so they are allowed entry even though they aren't residents here, and she is really proud of herself for it too since there's no security system out there that she can't bypass. As Veltol and Takahashi get on the elevator, Takahashi is about to push the elevator button, but Veltol stops her and says he wants to do it instead. Takahashi doesn't mind letting him push the button, but she asks why he wants to do it and Veltol doesn't really have a reason for it, he just likes pushing buttons. He begins pushing the button for the 13th floor, but Takahashi forgot to mention that this elevator doesn't allow you to get to the 13th floor directly. First you'd have to go to the 2nd floor, then the 17th and back to the 4th and so on until you eventually get to the 13th floor. Since they are here, Veltol starts walking out of the elevator but Takahashi tells him to wait since her client Eiju is a pretty paranoid guy, so he had dozens of traps laid across the entire floor and in Veltol accidentally sets one of the traps off he's going to become mincemeat. Veltol appreciates the warning but as far as he can tell there are no traps in this room, although it would be more accurate to say that all the physical and magical traps have been disarmed. Takahashi is surprised that Veltol could figure that out so easily. The part of his duties as Demon Lord included building and maintaining dungeons, so discerning the land of traps is the trivial matter for him. They continue walking until they finally get to Eiju's front door and Takahashi rings the bell but surprisingly, he doesn't answer. Takahashi can understand him ignoring phone calls but he usually always answers his front door. However, upon closer inspection, Veltol realizes that the door isn't even locked in the first place. This raises a red flag for Takahashi since Eiju would never do something as careless as leave his front door unlocked. Veltol suggests they should proceed with caution since they don't know what they will find in there, so Takahashi leads the way and heads towards Eiju's workroom. There she finds Eiju in his chair, but when she gets a little closer to him, she discovers that he's drenched in blood and completely lifeless. Takahashi freaks out at first, but Veltol calms her down and goes over to inspect the body. He remembers seeing this guy's face somewhere before, although he was wearing a bunch of trash at the time. Takahashi says that sounds like something Eiju would do since he had often dressed as a hobo whenever he went out to gather information. There's an obvious stab wound in Eiju's chest and another one in his neck, but judging from the state of the blood around him, Veltol assumes it has only been a few days since Eiju was killed. A man like Eiju may have had many enemies, but the way he was murdered was too efficient for it to have been done out of hatred. It is way more likely that a hitman was hired to take Eiju out, especially since the killer went through the effort of destroying Eiju's familia. Someone must be trying to cover up whatever information Eiju had. It probably had something to do with the job Takahashi accepted from him, but it's not like they can get any information from him now that he's dead. Takahashi thinks for a second, and being searching around Eiju's room because its seasoned information broker/hacker would definitely hide some sort of offline storage devices nearby for extra data security. After searching for a bit, she discovers a laptop and a hidden desk drawer, and this looks like it might have the answers they are looking for, but when she turns it on, she finds all the files in a corrupted mess. It may look that way, but Veltol notices that the files are all arranged in a very specific order, so Takahashi is able to compile until she uncovers a video. Eiju made this video in case he was killed before he could complete his investigation, and he didn't know who would end up watching it, but he wanted to make sure at least one person knew the truth because the prosperity of this city was built upon terrifying evil. All the power in the city relies on the ether reactor in the center of the city, but with the enormous scale of the city, the reactor would need at least 10 men on ley lines to draw power from in order to meet the energy demands. However, there are only 2 ley lines in this area and the reactor never seems to run out of energy, so it stands to reason that the reactor is drawing power from another source, and this secondary power source is called the Immortal Furnace Project. Essentially, the furnace burns the souls of immortals like firewood and converts the resulting energy into a ether for the city, and since immortals are higher beings, a single immortal soul produces a lot of energy, way more than the souls of thousands of mortals would ever be able to generate. The data Eiju found show that Marcus's company employed desperate homeless people as construction workers from the Immortal Furnace, but once construction was done, all the workers suddenly disappeared and Eiju believes they were all killed so they could be fed to the furnace as well. One of the first immortals to be fed to the furnace was one of Veltol's close subordinates, Xenol, and this greatly angers Veltol. The whole immortal hunt was esteemed by Marcus to turn the world against immortals so people would accept their execution, and he could burn immortal souls in the furnace, although the public was never made aware that this was how he killed them. Recently Marcus made a deal to buy information about some immortals from the Yakuza, and that probably means he's running low on immortal souls to burn, so he's looking for new victims. If the furnace runs out of immortal fuel and the heart of the city would cease to exist as people know it. But even so, Eiji thinks it's wrong and that innocent immortals are being sacrificed to power the city. After the video ends, Takahashi is enraged by the revelation that immortals are being treated so badly, but there's not much she can do about it since even if she were to try and publicize this information, it is likely she would just end up dead just like Eiji over here. Veltol tells her that this is a problem for immortals, and as the king of immortals it is his duty to do something about it so she doesn't need to burn herself with this. For now they decide to inform city officials of Eiji's death so he can receive a proper burial, and as they leave, Veltol tries to contact Machina so he can inform her of the immortal furnace. But to his horror, she isn't responding to his calls. Something must have happened to her. While Veltol was busy on his errand, Machina looked in the fridge to see what she could make for dinner by the time he got back, but it was still the same stuff in there as last time. On the bright side, Elec tells her she should be able to make some good curry with the ingredients she's got on hand. Just then, the doorbell rings so she gets up to go answer it, but to her utter disgust and disappointment, it turns out to be Marcus. After what Marcus has done, the only appropriate response is violence on sight, so Machina hits him with a as she is, so a little fire isn't going to be enough to end him. Machina completely transforms and steps out of the house to face him because she already knows he's up to no good. Before the fight begins, Machina disconnects her familia from the network so Marcus won't be able to access it, and after that the two of them begin launching magic weapon attacks at each other. It looks like it's been fairly even so far, but then while Marcus is distracted, Machina gets enclosed and grabs onto one of his arms, causing it to explode and come off entirely. She managed to catch Marcus off guard with that one, but few seconds later, he has already regenerated his arm. He then casts a bloody sword rain area attack and stabs Machina through the chest while she's distracted. Machina collapses to the ground and she isn't getting back up anytime soon. Now that the fight is over, the secretary schools Marcus for acting so recklessly since Machina could have easily killed her back there, and all this fighting could have been avoided if Marcus had simply disabled Machina's familia from the start. As the two stands over Machina's motionless body, Machina glares at Marcus, but Marcus is actually enjoying it because he loves seeing Machina in such a pitiful state. Machina asked him what he did to her, so Marcus explains that he simply shut her familia down. Machina didn't think it would be possible for him to do since she disconnected her familia from the internet before the fight started, and normally she would have been right, but Marcus's familia is somewhat special. It's a new prototype that was designed specifically to be more advanced than the modern familias. All modern familias have an inbuilt backdoor that allows access to the system, and as the director of IHMI he has admin access to every familia in the city, so he can forcibly shut any familia down if he chooses to. That means that no one can defeat him since he can shut down all familia users and he would outclass all non-familia users in casting speed. And if no one is capable of defeating him, then that means he is the strongest in the world. That may be true, but Machina doesn't understand why Marcus is so obsessed with being the strongest since he has nothing to gain from it. But Marcus has his reasons. He wants to become the new demon lord and he doesn't intend to achieve that status through brute force like Veltol did. In this era, all you need is information and technology, so if you control those, then you control the world. However, controlling the world from behind the scenes would be too boring for someone like him, so he intends to absolutely dominate the world. Far more than Veltol ever managed to dominate during his prime. Just then, the secretary reminds Marcus that they didn't schedule any time for a monologue, so they are running late on his next appointment. Marcus decides to wrap things up here quickly, so it's time for Machina to become fuel for the immortal furnace. By the time the Veltol and Takahashi return home, they find the entire place destroyed with no traces of Machina whatsoever. The only thing left is a scorched game controller and Veltol is absolutely devastated because Machina is the person he cared for the most in this world. He is completely zoned out in grief, so Takahashi asked him if he's alright and Veltol snaps back to reality. They aren't going to solve anything by standing around, so Veltol asks if there's any information about what happened here. According to the social media reports, people are speculating that some sort of explosion took place, but the details are pretty hazy, so there's no way of knowing how much of it is actually true. Veltol wishes there was some way for him to at least figure out where Machina is right now. Since they are unable to contact her directly, Takahashi looks for another way to locate Machina, and it's going to involve the drones. Since this place is a slum, there aren't a lot of security drones passing throughout, but there are a lot of delivery drones though. And those drones have cameras on them, so all she needs to do is hack into their systems and take a look at the video data. Within a few moments, Takahashi gains access to the drone systems, and from the video feed, they can see the battle that took place here, and that Marcus was the one behind it. They can't tell what Marcus was saying, but after defeating Machina, he and his secretary took her and drove to a restricted section of the city reactor. And that can only mean that he intends to burn Machina's soul to power the city. Veltol thanks Takahashi for the valuable information and starts walking in the direction of the reactor, but Takahashi tells him to wait and think this through. She understands why he wants to rush in there save Machina before it's too late, but that reactor is the most secure location in the entire city and has dozens of Magino gears patrolling the area, so Veltol won't be able to handle it on his own. And while Takahashi can certainly help him get there, she isn't much of a fighter, so he would need to find someone who's strong enough to help him, but Veltol doesn't have many remain allies in this era. Although there is one person can think of who might be perfect for this rescue operation. Veltol later goes to meet with Graham, and at first Graham wants nothing to do with him, but when he sees the proud Veltol kneel before him asks for help, he decides to at least hear him out. Veltol explains everything he has learned about the city's ether reactor, and Graham had always suspected that something wrong was going on there, but now that he knows the truth, he's absolutely appalled by the despicable nature of the project. Veltol pleads with Graham to assist him in storming the reactor because he knows he cannot save Machina as he is right now, but Graham seems more annoyed than sympathetic. Veltol's subordinates killed Graham's family. Veltol himself waged dozens of wars and killed millions of people, and now he's bowing his head to his sworn enemy just to save the life of one immortal woman. He finds this to be utterly shameless. Graham does not like the fact that this city is built upon the deaths of innocent people, but at the same time that reactor is the heart of the city, so if he were to agree to help Veltol destroy it, then the entire city would be plunged into darkness, and the lives of millions of people would be ruined. He asks if Veltol is planning to destroy the lives of everyone just to save one person, but Veltol laughs at the idea of such a short-sighted plan. He's no fool, so he has obviously thought about the consequences of his actions, and that's why he intends to both save Machina and fix the problems of the city. However, right now he does not possess the power or support necessary to do so. So he has no choice but to humbly ask his former enemy for help, and the confidence behind Veltol's words convinces Graham to get up and act as a hero once more. However, he makes it extremely clear that he is not doing this to help Veltol, and he still hasn't forgiven all the atrocities Veltol committed centuries ago, but there's a kidnapped woman whose soul is about to be burned. So he agrees to temporarily join forces for the sake of justice, although it still feels strange to be teaming up with the Demon Lord. A little while later, Takahashi manages to find a way for the two of them to get into the reactor without having to go through the restricted area, so she leads them to a hidden entrance. Apparently this was used to transport all the materials that were used to build the reactor, but even if this path will eventually lead them to the reactor, Veltol says they don't have enough time to clear a maze like this. On the other hand, Graham thinks it will be child's play to clear this maze, since he has done it so many times in the past. He casts his spell, called auto-mapping, and within a few seconds a detailed map of the maze begins to appear in his hand. Veltol has never seen a spell like this before, so Graham explains that it's a unique one he came up with during his time as an adventurer, but that just makes Veltol all angry because he put a lot of effort into building those dungeons back in the day, and it turns out Graham was just cheating his way through it. He accuses Graham of having no pride as an adventurer, but Graham says an adventurer's pride has nothing to do with this since his goal was always to get through dungeons as quickly as possible. So he couldn't care less if Veltol traps and tricks went to waste because he had a map. Takahashi is getting sick of all their arguing, so she yells at them to quiet down and take the mission seriously because they still need to rescue Machina. The two of them realized they were being really childish, so they both apologize to Takahashi and promise to focus on the task at hand. A few moments later, Graham finishes creating the map, and with this they will be able to make their way through this maze without getting lost. Veltol asks if Graham is sure they can trust the map, and Graham confirms it, adding that his mapping magic can also detect traps and enemies, but this maze doesn't seem to have any security measures, so it should be fine for them to take the shortest path to the reactor. As the two of them head towards the reactor, Veltol calls Takahashi to apologize again for his outburst earlier. Takahashi is still a little pissed about it, but as long as Veltol stays on task from now on, she's willing to overlook it. He asked her how her end of the plan is going so far, and she says she is making steady progress, but what she's working on will take a lot of time to get ready, so she's not sure if she will be able to get it done by the time the two of them make it down to the reactor room. If she ends up needing more time, Veltol and Graham are going to have to keep the enemies busy for a while to compensate, and Veltol understands that. As they descend, the ambient ether becomes more and more dense and communication with Takahashi gets choppy, so before she gets cut off, she tells him she will finish making the preparations. Veltol takes a deep breath to prepare himself for what lies ahead, and Graham comments that he can tell that Veltol has grown stronger than he was in the past. Veltol doesn't know what he's talking about since he is clearly nowhere near the strength he had during his prime, but that's not what Graham was talking about. Veltol was able to lower his head to the sworn enemy in order to save his subordinate, but the old Veltol would have let Machina burn before he bowed to anyone. That shows that Veltol's strength of character is greater than ever before, and if he had been like this when they had their shot down all those years ago, then the results might have been different. As the lift arrives at the destination, Veltol and Graham are confronted by Marcus's secretary, and she's been expecting them since Marcus knew Veltol would eventually show up. The story continues. We see Marcus has Machina restrained and is holding her near the core of the reactor, and he seems to be taking great pleasure in the fact that he's about to kill a former comrade. After Veltol was revived, Marcus did a little digging into those around him and research, and that's when he discovered that Machina was still around and kicking. Over the years, with the immortal hunts he had orchestrated, he's caused the deaths of many immortals, so he never could have imagined that Machina was still alive and laying low within the city. He explains to her that this place is known as the Immortal Furnace, and as the name suggests, it basically burns the souls of immortals as fuel to generate ether, which in turn fuels the city. At first, Machina is a bit confused by Marcus's monologue, but then she remembers that two of her subordinates are still missing, so she pieces together that Marcus must have kidnapped and fed them to the Immortal Furnace. Marcus recalls those two and tells Machina all about how concerned the two of them looked for one another as their souls were burned up. And this enrages her, to such an extent that she unleashes a large torrent of flame, but Marcus simply puts up a shield and remains unharmed. He further taunts Machina, reminding her of her fellow dark peer Xenol and informing her that he was the first immortal to be fed to the furnace. Marcus even enjoyed hearings and all screams of agony so much that he recorded it and turned it into a mixtape. Machina asks him if he intends to use her as fuel as well, but that should be pretty obvious by now. The last immortal they stuck in the furnace about to burn out, and Marcus can afford to let the reactor run out of power since it's the cornerstone of the city. Normally he would have just sent people out to find more immortals, but if what he is doing were to become public knowledge, there would be a bunch of annoying people talking about things like immortal rights. And he doesn't want to have to deal with that, which is why he went to retrieve Machina personally. Since she's one of the dark peers, her soul should be strong enough to burn for a couple of years, so the Marcus won't have to worry about refueling for a while, but he's probably going to have to start looking into alternative power sources at some point. While Marcus is still monologuing, his secretary faced off against Veltol and Graham. She tells Veltol that she was assigned to stand guard and delay him long enough for Marcus to get through his evil monologue and feed Machina to the furnace. She didn't think Veltol would have the guts to show up though. And not only did he come, but he brought a friend along. And that friend happens to be none other than the hero Graham. Graham is surprised that there are people in this era who still know of him, but the secretary just recognizes him from the files they have in their database. She finds it interesting that the Demon Lord and the hero are working together, but she's still got a job to do, so she won't let them pass without a fight. Graham tells Veltol to go on ahead, while he keeps the secretary busy, but Veltol warns him that he should be careful because from what he has seen, this secretary's skills are on par with Xenol the Karmic Swords. But while that may be an impressive feat for her, Graham recalls overwhelmingly defeating Xenol in pure swordsmanship during the Immortal War, so if her skills or anything similar, he isn't worried about losing to her. The secretary takes offense to this statement, so she decides to show Graham what she can do and dashes behind him to launch a surprise attack. Graham is caught off guard by her incredible speed, but before her sword strikes him, he manages to guard himself and prevent any injuries. While he does this, Veltol starts sprinting away so he can rescue Machina, and as much as the secretary wants to stop him, she's not going to be able to slip past Graham without a fight. Before Veltol leaves, he tells Graham to make sure he doesn't die, and then he jumps down the center line of the reactor to make it to the core as fast as possible. The secretary really needs to stop Veltol, so she decides to take Graham down as quickly as possible and regroup with Marcus, and to do that, she activates her zero base gear. There's a blinding flash of light, and before Graham realizes what's going on, he gets hit and is knocked all the way into a wall. He looks down at the secretary, and she is now wearing a full set of Magino gear and not just regular Magino gear either. This is a prototype next-gen version that has yet to be released. It is more efficient, quicker, and most importantly, it fits better so the secretary's curves won't go to waste. However, there is still one flaw with the design because the operational time of this suit is entirely dependent on the user's magical reserves, but the secretary isn't going to let this fight last long enough for her magic to run out. She dashes forward, and now she's even faster than she was before, so as she lands in the wall behind Graham, he barely has enough time to raise his sword and block before he gets knocked through the floor. The secretary tells him that he should be honored to face such a marvel of modern engineering, but Graham isn't interested in hearing her go into another marketing speech. The secretary calls Graham a relic of the past since his sword, armor, and even his familia are all outdated, and as such, she is sure she will be able to claim victory with her cutting-edge techniques and equipment. Graham tells her that fancy equipment and training don't guarantee victory in a match because at the end of the day you either win or you lose, and the secretary agrees. But then again, her fancy equipment is pretty fancy. She sashes at Graham with such speed that he is barely able to react and block before he is hit. But then he sees her sheath her sword again, and the second she does, she unleashes yet another lightning speed slash. However, this time Graham was prepared for it and he was able to block it much more comfortably. Even so, he still can't find any openings in her defenses, so he admits that the level of advancement this era has achieved is truly frightening. The secretary tries dashing behind him to attack once more, but Graham has seen that already, so he parries her attacks and kicks her away, but he can tell that he didn't do much damage due to the toughness of her armor. He hasn't made much progress against her in this fight, but he has at least figured out one thing about her attack pattern. He says she can only use that lightning-fast attack of hers when her sword is fully sheathed, and the secretary confirms that he is correct, but simply discovering that doesn't mean he can beat her. With her Magino gear and credible attack speed, her victory is pretty much guaranteed and she's grown tired of wasting time here, so she's going to finish this quickly. She begins repeatedly attacking Graham with her lightning blade, but he seems to have gotten used to the speed, so he's able to dodge her attacks fairly easily. And even when he gets hit, he takes almost no damage and recovers immediately before landing on his feet. The secretary charges at him again, but this time while their blades are locked, she tries to hack into Graham's familia to shut his body down. But for some reason, she can't gain access, so she assumes Graham must have implemented some safeguards against hacking. If she can't hack into his familia, this is going to be a lot harder than she anticipated, but she is still confident that she can win nonetheless. However, while she's in the middle of saying this, Graham decides to go offensive, so he steps on her sword to hold her in place and casts an earthglaive that sends shards of rock fly at her. The secretary manages to free herself without much trouble, but Graham hasn't finished yet. In the next second, he casts an ice spell to freeze the rocks and place along with the secretary. And while he knows it won't be enough to hold her for long, he just needed her to stay in one place long enough for him to get close and multi-layer cast a fireball at point-blank range. The force of the explosion is so powerful that it sends the secretary flying backwards into the wall. But despite all the fireworks, she's still mostly unharmed. Oh, she's really pissed that a relic of the past like Graham is giving her such a difficult time. Graham is amazed that a fireball of that level didn't do more damage, but at least he knows his tactics are still effective against her. The secretary's enraged and sprints forward in a frenzied attack, but all of her strikes are parried and Graham connects cleanly with the slash to the chest, although it still doesn't get through the armor. She gets pushed back and she doesn't understand how she could possibly be losing to a fossil like Graham. But even if Graham is old, he is still the hero who single-handedly ended the Immortal War, so there's no way something like this would be able to be him. She decides to try one final attack and puts all her mana into her lightning strike, because she couldn't possibly lose a full power clash against that rusty sword Graham is holding, but Graham corrects her and says his sword isn't rusty. It may be dullner right now, but as long as there is someone in need of a hero, it will always regain its light. Graham calls upon the power of the Ixisword for the first time in centuries, and after a brief confirmation of Graham's noble intentions, the sword grants him permission to use its power. So he squares up against the secretary and tells her he is about to use his ultimate technique, the very same one that killed Veltol all those years ago. The secretary still tries her best to defeat Graham. When she sees the size of his sword light growing, she realizes she isn't getting paid enough to deal with all this, but it's too late by then, so Graham unleashes his attack. It is still insanely powerful, so even though the sword only allowed him to use a fraction of the power that he possessed in his prime, Graham was still able to completely destroy the secretary's Magino gear with that one awakened strike, and it's honestly impressive that she managed to survive getting hit with it in the first place. The secretary has finally realized that she can't beat Graham, but she still doesn't understand why she lost to him, so Graham sits down next to her and explains that her defeat was mainly because of the difference in experience, especially since he has over 500 years of experience. The secretary asks why Graham isn't getting up to go help Veltol's fight Marcus, but Graham thinks Veltol will be just fine on his own. She tells Graham that Veltol stands no chance against Marcus because Marcus is much stronger than her, and on top of that, no one without a familial will be capable of defeating or keeping up with Marcus in the first place. Graham tells her she's severely underestimating Veltol, although he understands why she would think Veltol is weaker than Marcus, since she has never seen Veltol's trump card. The only person who knows about it is Graham, since he had to fight Veltol to the death. But Veltol rarely ever used it, so even Marcus probably isn't aware of Veltol's legendary sword. Graham was only here to make sure that people like the secretary don't interfere with Veltol's fight, so he is sure Veltol will come out victorious. If that's the case, then the secretary asks Graham if he is going to kill her, but he says he's not. He's a hero and the secretary is too injured to continue fight him, so he has no reason to finish her off. Just then, magic bullets begin raining down on the two, so Graham uses his magic and casts his shield to keep them safe. It looks like reinforcements have arrived, but they were more than willing to shoot the secretary along with Graham, so something tells him that she is in as much danger as he is. And if that's the case, what kind of hero would he be if he didn't protect an injured woman to the best of his abilities? Meanwhile, down in the core, Marcus has Machina by the throat, and is just about done with his monologues. He throws Machina into the furnace so her soul can be burned up. But as she plummets to her certain doom, the only thing in Machina's mind is the fact that she will no longer be able to stand at Veltol's side. However, just before she hits the furnace, a cloud of black smoke rushes down and catches her. It then flies back up to the platform, and as Machina opens her eyes, she sees Veltol standing over her, saying he is here to save her. The story continues. We see Veltol turns to face Marcus, and Marcus is visibly annoyed by Veltol's presence, but he decides to pretend to be civil for a little while and mentions that he's been watching Veltol's streams lately, so he congratulates him for gaining 1 million subs. Veltol refuses to engage in idle chit-chat, but he wants to be fair about this. So he asks Marcus if he has any justifiable reason for attacking Machina and burning the souls of so many immortals. Marcus proudly states that he doesn't need to justify his actions to Veltol, so Veltol only has one more question to ask. He wants to know if Marcus will ever swear his loyalty to him again, but without skipping a beat. Marcus declares that he will never serve under Veltol for as long as he lives. Veltol is heard all he needs to hear, so he summons his demonic sword and declares that he will end Marcus's immortal life today. Marcus isn't fazed by Veltol's threat in the slightest, so he begins casting blood spears at Veltol, and even though Veltol is able to deflect them, Marcus makes the spears explode to catch him off guard and pulls out a blood sword so he can fight in close range. Veltol makes it out of the explosion unharmed, so he charges at Marcus, and Marcus notices that Veltol already has strengthening magic cast on himself. He admits that that was a smart move, since Marcus can't cancel out magic that has already been activated. But despite Veltol's strengthening magic, Marcus is still able to keep up with and even overpower him in physical combat. Veltol gets knocked back to the ground and Marcus takes great pleasure in seeing him down on his hands and knees, but Veltol refuses to give up because he still needs to punish Marcus for his heinous crimes against immortal kind. Marcus marks Veltol and asks him if he really thinks he has what it takes to follow through on that threat. But there is no doubt in Veltol's mind about whether he can defeat Marcus or not, because he is the one true demon lord. Marcus laughed in his face and starts dashing around the room as he tells Veltol that his days of being the demon lord are long gone, but Veltol doesn't fall for his provocation and catches Marcus as he was trying to sneak up from behind. So he raises his sword and aims straight for his neck to take out Marcus's familia. Unfortunately, Marcus saw this coming, so at the last second, he pushes Veltol's sword up so his strike only took out Marcus's head. After Marcus regenerates his head, he tells Veltol that he fully expected him to target his familia at some point in their fight, but no matter what Veltol tries, he is never going to be able to pace him. Just like on the day Veltol got resurrected, the fact that he doesn't have a familia puts him at a significant disadvantage. And to make that clear to him, Marcus decides to display the power of his familia spell casting. Before Veltol can even react, Marcus casts a bloody bomb spell on his hand, and he continues doing it over and over again until Veltol's arms and legs have been atomized. He then decides to finish it off with a massive explosion to the chest. But even though Veltol is practically medium rare at this point and Marcus is on top, Marcus doesn't feel satisfied at all. He thought he would enjoy humiliating Veltol to this extent, but now that he has attained victory, all he feels is emptiness. He starts slowly walking towards Machina so he can throw her in the furnace like he planned earlier, but all of a sudden he feels a terrifying pressure behind him. Veltol has gotten back to his feet and he seems more powerful than ever before. He commands Marcus for being able to corner him to this extent and admits that he really can't beat Marcus in his current form. All the power Marcus possesses in this current era is a result of his own hard work and Veltol respects him for it, but that doesn't mean he will lose. He may have lost once before, but Veltol is still the final boss and up till this point Graham is the only one who has ever pushed him to this point. But before Veltol goes all out, he's going to ask Marcus one last time if he is willing to give up his evil ways and return to serve under Veltol once more. Marcus is visibly shaken and asks why Veltol would be bothered with a question like that at this point. So Veltol tells him that depending on Marcus's answer, he may be willing to overlook all the chaos that Marcus has caused. Marcus becomes erratic and starts yelling that Veltol's time as the Demon Lord is over, so he's going to make sure he gets rid of him and every other immortal so that he will be the only immortal Demon Lord. Veltol accepts that as a no, and Marcus attempts to cast a blood sword to attack Veltol before he can do anything, but his spell gets cancelled before he can finish. Marcus doesn't understand what just happened, but the panic is starting to set in really bad as Veltol is laughing maniacally. He says he will grant Marcus the honor of witnessing his glorious second form, so he begins his transformation. Meanwhile, outside the reactor base, Takahashi is fulfilling her role in Veltol's plan. This may be slightly illegal, but she uses her hacking skills to hijack every screen in the city and plays one of Veltol's pre-recorded streams for everyone to see. At first, the people are confused by the sudden ads, but Veltol's hot and his stream is entertaining, so their confusion soon becomes interest as the stream progresses. With that, Takahashi's job is done, so she thinks back to what Veltol told her on the ride here. He didn't have any specific orders for her, but he said he needed her to raise people's faith in him. She had no idea what he was talking about, so she asks for a little clarification on how exactly his faith boost works. Veltol didn't feel like explaining all the intricacies of his faith system, so he told her that all she needed to do was raise his popularity and that should do the trick. Takahashi initially didn't think it was possible, since popularity can't be raised in a single day. But then again, she's an elite hacker in a technology-driven era, so she can do as much illegal stuff as necessary to make it happen. And the best part is that since she did it anonymously, the police are never going to catch her. Veltol's faith should be at an all-time high at this point, so it's up to him now to make use of it and save Machina. Down in the reactor core, Marcus is really starting to rethink his choices when he sees Veltol's second form. He never knew Veltol possessed a form like this, but Veltol calls him stupid for truly thinking he understood all the power of the Demon Lord. In order to manifest this form, Veltol requires a large amount of faith as well as direct access to some high-density ether ley lines. He welcomes Marcus to tremble in fear before his greatness, but Marcus still thinks he might have a chance of winning since Veltol still managed to lose to Graham back then. Veltol can't deny that he was defeated by Graham, but if Marcus thinks he is capable of replicating such an incredible feat, then he is more than welcome to try. Marcus nervously tries to cast his blood sword, but it's still not working, and no matter how many times he casts it, it keeps getting cancelled just before it is activated. Marcus doesn't understand why this is happening, but Veltol tells him there's nothing to be confused about since he is only replicating the same trick Marcus pulled the first time they fought. Back then Marcus's familia let him stay 2 steps ahead of Veltol in terms of magic casting, but now with Veltol's new form and boosted capability, he's been able to achieve proclaim less magic. Marcus can't believe Veltol managed to achieve something like that in such a short time, when even the latest magitech isn't able to recreate magic without incantations or proclamation. But it was pretty simple for Veltol to do once he took this form and fully analyzed Marcus's familia. Using Proclaim Less magic does eat up a lot of ether, but luckily Veltol is right next to a massive power source, so he can use it as much as he wants and can cast magic simply by thinking about it. And all this is thanks to Marcus, because even with Veltol's genius, he would never have been able to achieve this without Marcus's work as a baseline. So he once again commends him for his excellent work, but now it's time for his punishment. Marcus still refuses to accept that he has lost, so he tries to cast his blood swords again, but this time instead of just canceling Marcus's magic, Veltol decides to disable Marcus's familia altogether, so he can't spam his magic anymore. That doesn't stop Marcus from trying though, but he looks so pitiful and desperate that's kind of awkward. Eventually he sinks in that he has been completely dominated, so he starts questioning how this could have possibly happened to him after all the careful planning he did to surpass Veltol. Veltol was getting sick of hearing Marcus whine, so he summons an explosion inside Marcus's mouth to shut him up and tells him to remain silent. However, Marcus regenerates his mouth and is about to begin yelling again, so Veltol uses wind magic to slice him up and fire magic to burn him to ash. Marcus is still able to regenerate from this, so Veltol just keeps hitting him with all kinds of magic until Marcus falls to the ground exhausted. Simply killing him isn't going to be enough of a punishment for the crimes Marcus has committed, so Veltol decides to take a page out of Takahashi's book and uses his magic to hack into Marcus's familia and make him see some terrifying shit. Marcus starts freaking out, so Veltol explains that none of those things are actually real. He's simply using Marcus's familia to feed his brain false visual information, and this kind of illusion is so realistic that one would never be able to tell the difference normally. Marcus can't believe Veltol was able to hack into his state-of-the-art familia so easily. But after everything else Veltol has done isn't actually that surprising, Marcus has basically lost all his advantages now, so between the threat of being killed over and over again in the hands of Veltol or being left to go insane while haunted by illusions, Marcus begins cowering in fear and pleading for his life. He even swears that he will loyally serve Veltol once more, but Veltol already gave him 2 chances to surrender and he made it clear that there would be no mercy afterwards, so it's time to get on with Marcus' punishment. He raises his sword and stabs Marcus through the back while he's bowing and then raises his body up. But when Marcus opens his eyes, he realizes that he's being dangled off the immortal furnace and his terrible fate begins to set in. Marcus asks Veltol if he's really going to drop him in the furnace, and Veltol doesn't hesitate to answer because that's exactly what he plans to do. Marcus tries to talk Veltol out of it since he stands to gain nothing by dropping Marcus in the furnace, but Veltol has very good reasons for wanting to drop Marcus in. 1, his face is annoying, and 2, if Marcus has dropped in the furnace then it will continue to operate a little while longer, at least long enough for an alternative energy source to be invented. Marcus starts yelling that Veltol is no better than him, since he is willing to use the machine that he came here to save Machina from, and while going through with this definitely is morally gray, Veltol isn't called a demon lord because he's a morally upstanding guy. Marcus starts arguing that aside from his selfish ambitions, there were circumstances that forced him to do things this way, so it's not entirely his fault, but Veltol isn't going to be talked down, so Marcus attempts to use some of his blood as a last-ditch attack. I have no idea why he thought that would do anything though. Veltol is done dealing with Marcus, so he uses his fingers to scrape Marcus's body off his sword and drops him into the immortal furnace where he completely disintegrates and becomes fuel for the furnace. Now that Marcus is gone, Machina's bindings come undone and Veltol returns to normal, so it's all finally over. But this whole mess and the possibility of losing Machina forever had taught him a little bit about the value of life. So he has come to realize that he cares for Machina more than anything in this world and tells her that he loves her. The story continues. Some time passes and we see a blonde girl in the school staring out the window because she's bored with her current life. She glances at a couple of girls in her class with Giga Chad jawlines, and the second they catch her looking at them, they begin calling her a loser in every way imaginable, and all without breaking the mooing streak. Just then the teacher enters the class and tells everyone that they have a couple new transfer students joining their class today, and as she tells the first exchange student to introduce himself, we see Veltol proudly state his name and proclaim that he will leave his mark on this city. If you're wondering how we got here after the incident with Marcus, Veltol and Machina's lives pretty much went back to normal and Veltol continues with his streaming career. He has just beaten the final boss of his speedrun campaign, and Machina has been cheering for him the whole time from the other room. Now that he's finally done, Veltol gloats over his victory to his viewers because they kept saying there was no way he would win. Although it did take him 3 days of non-stop gaming to finish a 10-hour game, so if he wasn't immortal he'd probably be dead from sleep deprivation. Any case, his resilience has once again earned him a victory, so Veltol bids his viewers farewell and ends the stream. Now that his stream is finally over, Machina enters Veltol's room and congratulates him for successfully clearing the game, but she asks that he please take a break at least once every 24 hours because she hasn't gotten to spend any time with him for the past 3 days. Veltol apologizes and says he will make sure to spend some quality time with her, but on a side note, Veltol and Machina no longer living in Machina's rundown apartment, so Veltol's channel must be doing really well. In fact, he has just reached 3 million subscribers, so Machina asked him if he would like to celebrate by going out to eat sushi. Veltol appreciates the sentiment, but he says there's no need to celebrate something as trivial as 3 million subs because the true milestone is the fact that his power has risen to the point where he can now access his Dark Sword's second form at will. Machina congratulates him on that as well and again asks if he would like to go out for sushi to celebrate. So Veltol will ask her if she really wants sushi that badly, but Machina says she doesn't particularly like sushi. Veltol is confused by this, but instead of asking her to explain, he's just going to ignore her statement and go back to talking about his sword's second form. Unfortunately, he doesn't have much of a use for it since his sword's second form is mainly used to execute immortals. Speaking of which, now that Marcus has been dealt with, Veltol thinks it's time for them to start looking for the rest of the immortal dark peers that went missing. The ones who are still missing are Ralsheen, Silwald and May, and knowing Marcus, he would definitely have bragged about killing them if he had done it, so it's safe to assume that they are still alive somewhere. Veltol asked Machina if she is willing to help him with his arduous task, and she swears that she will do all that she can to make sure they succeed. Now as for how to find the other Dark Peters, Veltol recalls creating a Dark Peers record at one point before he was defeated. So he asked Machina if she knows what happened to it. The Dark Peer records have all the mana signatures of the various Dark Peers engraved into it, so it keeps track of their location and activities automatically. However, Machina explains that the records went missing a long time ago, so it's going to be really hard to find them now, but even so Veltol is determined to locate the rest of his subordinates, no matter how long it takes. But just then, the doorbell rings, so they go to answer it and find Takahashi standing there. Veltol is surprised to see Takahashi in uniform because she never told him she was a high schooler this entire time. He asked her if it's really alright for her to be doing all those dangerous and illegal jobs of hers when she's still a student. But Takahashi doesn't see anything wrong with it as long as she doesn't get caught. She also mentions that she saw Veltol stream earlier, so she congratulates him on beating that game even if it did take him 3 days. Veltol is a little worried that his viewers might not like him streaming for so long, but Takahashi assures him that it's not that big of a deal. People usually just listen to long streams as background music, so as long as he posts some highlights every once in a while for those who can't watch the whole thing, he should be fine. She asked what game Veltol plans to stream next, but then there's an awkward silence since he doesn't plan on streaming for a while. Takahashi figures out that there's something Veltol and Machina aren't telling her, so she starts whining about how unfair it is that they would keep secrets from a friend like her. Veltol eventually decides to let her in on the mission and tells her that he is searching for an ancient magical gadget called the Dark Peer Records. Takahashi gets all excited after hearing this, since either means she gets to go on a treasure hunt. She tells Veltol he can rely on her to locate the records since with her hacking skills, it shouldn't be that hard. She begins searching the internet, but Machina doesn't think it'll be that easy to locate ancient techniques online. And while she may be right, Takahashi has her ways of finding what she needs to know. First, she searches through all the possible locations where the records could be, including collections, museums, and ruins, and after cross-referencing the data, she finally locates the records in Akihabara City. It's one of the satellite cities of Shinjuku, and it's also home to the most prestigious magic academy in the world, Luzel. The school was founded right after the Immortal War ended, and there are rumors that there's a treasure buried beneath it. But the door to the treasure vault has remained sealed for over 500 years. The timeline of the school's formation lines up with the time the record would have gone missing. So Veltol believes it has to be in that treasure vault. Machina asks if they should bust in there and take the records by force, but Takahashi thinks that plan is way too barbaric. It'd be way easier for them to just sneak in undetected and steal it since Takahashi can disable their security system, but Veltol has an even better idea in mind. If they're going to sneak into a school anyway, why not simply enroll as students and blend in? That sounds pretty fun to Takahashi, so she offers to force the documents for them and Veltol officially declares that he will be going to school. The next day, they get their things ready and set out for Akihabara City. But when they finally arrive, Veltol gets stuck at the immigration gate by a robot asking for his ID. However, Veltol has 3 million subs now, so he is outraged that the robot doesn't already know who he is. He was just about to call for a manager, but Takahashi doesn't want to deal with any Karen outburst from Veltol, so she just shows the robot his identification and drags him away so they can keep heading for the school. Once they leave the station, Veltol's eyes light up because this place looks exactly like Alneath did back in the day, and he feels nostalgic getting to see it again. This city is known for its advanced magineering, so the magical prosthetic souls here are some of the best in the world and perform extraordinarily. Such incredible technology would have been impossible to make during his era. Magical prosthetics are one thing, but for them to be so advanced that it's possible for people to replace their entire body, that's beyond anything he could have imagined. Takahashi tells him that while it may be possible to replace everything after what happened to David Martinez, people decided to stick to more moderate implants. The group moves on and eventually they arrive at the doorstep of the Luzel Academy, but Veltol is disappointed since this place doesn't match the Alneath aesthetic the rest of the city has. They head inside and meet with Trat Gotel, principal of the Magical Academy, to officially be admitted to the school, but Trat is no ordinary person. She's the leader of one of the 3 great houses in the city, the Gotel, and she pretty much runs half of the Akihabara city. So Takahashi isn't sure forged documents will fool. So she was totally prepared to pull as much random bullshit as necessary to get Trat to accept them. However, to her surprise, after Veltol tells Trat his name, Trat just accepts her documents without any further, but there is one more thing she's curious about, so she asks why Veltol decided to come to this school. Takahashi was about to make up a lie, but before she could say anything, Veltol answered saying they came here to take a look inside the treasury beneath the school. Trat then asks why Veltol is interested in the treasury, but Veltol just says that no secrets escape his keen eye. From there, Trat and Veltol start saying stuff Takahashi can't understand, but by the end of their conversation, Trat accepts that Veltol is just a cool dude who low-key wants to look at the treasury, so she's fine with granting him access, but there's just one problem. She wants to grant him access, but she can't because the treasury is currently sealed and has been sealed for the past 500 years. Veltol asks if it's possible for the seal to be removed, so Trat explains that in order to undo the seal they need the 3 houses that Gotel, the Seabirds, and the Reynolds to agree and gather their regalias together to act as a key. This sword right here is one of the 3 regalia known as Gotel's blade. So to undo the seal, Veltol would need to acquire the Seabird's crown and the Reynard's orb, and if he can manage to pull it off then Trat will gladly open the seal for him. To be honest, she's personally interested in seeing the contents of that vault herself, but there has been one major obstacle in her way. The Reynard's orb is currently missing. The group is later introduced to Miss Meg, their new homeroom teacher, and she leads them to their new classroom. Although in accordance with the rules of the school, Machina and Takahashi were required to remove their familias, and Takahashi feels strange not having her familia since she's so used to wearing it all the time. This school puts a lot of emphasis on traditional magic studies, so it is strictly prohibited for any student to wear a familia on school grounds. Veltol personally agrees with this policy since while a familia may be an incredible aid for everyday life, one can't truly understand magic unless one learns to do it unassisted. Once they arrive at the class, Mag tells them to come in one after another after she has explained everything to the rest of the class. While the teacher is gone, Veltol asks Machina and Takahashi what they should do for their introductions. He recently played a game with a transfer student in it, and he discovered that it is absolutely essential to have an impactful introduction, which leads us to his introduction. After Veltol boldly introduces himself, Machina and Takahashi to the same in their own ways. And once introductions are out of the way, Miss Mag calls Veltol over because she needs to measure his magical power with this crystal for his class assessment. Veltol understands why she wants to assess his magic, but he wants to warn her ahead of time because he is sure that he will end up breaking that crystal. Mag thinks Veltol is just overreacting and tells him that there's no way the crystal will break, but as Veltol attempts to use it the crystal indeed breaks. Meanwhile, we see Graham in this city, and he looks like he is searching for something. After the Marcus incident, he became friends with the secretary, so he's having her help him in his search for his goddess. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.